I'm Jenny Fish from One Big Happy Yarn Company. Welcome to our stripy mittens knit along. These mittens are designed by Sarah Delaney and we'll be using a combination of Noro Yarns. In this episode, we'll go over supplies, casting on, working the cuff, and thumb gusset. Check out onebighappy.com for our pre-selected color combinations. We put these into kits that include the printed pattern and the yarn you'll need to knit along with me. Let's get started. So let's start with supplies. We are using some Noro Yarns, a combination. This is the carry-on, this 100% wool, and this is the Silk Garden Solo. And this is a combination of silk, mohair, and lamb's wool. So it has a lot of texture to the yarn. A lot of texture and feel. This is going to be our main color, and this is going to be the striping or the accent color. So in the pattern, you're going to see MC, which is main color. That's going to be the carry-on, which is the 100% wool. And then you'll see CC, which is contrasting color, and that's what we're going to use for the stripes, and that is the Silk Garden Solo. So we have those in the kits for you. Okay, let me show you where these are in the finished mittens. This color right here, this is the main color, the MC, and then this pink stripe right here and in the cuff, that is the Silk Garden Solo, and that is the CC. So that's how they fit into the pattern and how they show up when they come along. Now we use the whole ball of yarn to make both mittens, and because this is a self-patterning yarn, you're going to see that the mittens don't exactly match. They're kind of mirror images of each other depending on where you start in the ball. So by this color changing, it makes it a really fun and whimsical project. Okay, we'll also need some knitting needles. We'll be using magic loop to make these mittens, and to start out, we're going to use a size 7, a US size 7 with a 40-inch cord. And then after we finish the ribbing, we're going to move up to a size 8. So I have my knitting needles here. I'll also have stitch markers, just your normal supplies. A row counter is very helpful in this project, and a measuring tape or the sock check to help measure. This is our sock check here. This thing, this is riding along in my notions bag like all the time now. When you get it, it has this paper on the back that you have to peel off. If you have a hard time getting it started to peel the paper off the back of the sock check, you can take a straight pin and kind of stick it in there to get it started, and then just peel it back. The residue isn't sticky. It doesn't stay on there once you peel it off. So we're good with that. But it's been a staple, so I just wanted to show that to you guys. All right, so we've gone over the supplies and some pattern notes about seeing MC and CC. In this pattern, we'll also be incorporating some increases and decreases, and I'll go over those as we get to them. So are you ready to get started casting on? So using the size 7, the smaller size needles, we're going to cast on, and I'm going to use a long tail cast on. I've got some yarn here from my ball of yarn. I am going to do long tail. We're casting on 32, but because I'm using magic loop, I'm going to cast on half, place a stitch marker, and then continue casting on. So I want probably about this much here. And you can always double check by wrapping around your needle, and the amount of times you wrap around your needle should equal the amount of stitches you can get from your tail, but you know, I'm going to wing it. There's only 32 that I'm casting on here. Tail towards my body, working yarn outwards, and I'm in the slingshot position and magic loop cast, or long tail cast on. I'm going to go under, and through. I've got 2 on my needle now. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Now at this point, I'm just going to slide a stitch marker on here like that, and then I'm going to cast on 16 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 and 16. So why I did 16 and 16 is because the total amount of stitches I want to cast on is 32. 16 is half of that. So this is giving me a middle point. I'm going to slide this to my cord like this, and this is the middle point. I'm going to pull through here. Now I know that I have the same amount of stitches on each of my needles when I set up for magic glue. I'll show you what that looks like here. Now I'm going to make sure that these are not twisted. I'm going to make sure that all of these inside stitches are right here, all facing each other, no twisting. And one of the things that I like to do to secure when I'm joining in the round is I take the side of my work that has that I started with, that has the slip knot, that knot's holding this loop in place, and I take that off. And then I'm going to take this back needle here, and I'm going to pick up this first stitch from the front needle, slide that onto there, and then I'm going to pop that one onto there. So in essence, I swap those two stitches, and that secures that. Keeps me from getting a gap, keeps me from putting extra stress on that join, and I have successfully joined these two in the round. Then I can take my working yarn, which is the one attached to my little ball here, and again, to keep me from grabbing my tail like I always do, I highly suggest just putting a slip knot into the tail. It's visual, and you can also feel it if you pick that up to start knitting with it, because we've all done that. If you haven't, congratulations, because I've done it several times. That's why I do that. Okay, we are going to go straight into the ribbing. The ribbing for this project is a 1x1 ribbing, which is a knit 1, purl 1. I'll show you how we do that. Here's our first stitch. We've got a knit 1. Now I'm bringing my yarn to the front of my work, and I'm going to purl 1. Taking it to the back, knit 1. We'll do this all the way around. And all these directions will be in the pattern that comes with your kit. We'll go ahead and rounds 1 through 4 will be in this ribbing, the knit 1, purl 1. I do want to show you when I get to the end of this needle how I go to the next needle, so just keep following along with me here as I finish this ribbing till I get to the end of this needle. Okay, so I'm at the end there. I'm going to go ahead and just pull. Haha, there it is. You don't need this stitch marker anymore, but I was just telling Sarah, who wrote this pattern, that it never fails. This stitch marker that I put to mark that middle spot, it just disappears at some point. This time I caught it. Earlier it flew across the room, so you don't need it anymore. It's just there for that one little step. But if you get there and it's like gone, don't worry, you're not the only one. It happens to all of us. Okay, so what I've done is this is the needle I just finished knitting onto. I'm flipping my work. This is the second section of that cast on. I need to finish this needle in order to finish the whole round. And I wanted to just show you what that looks like. So I finished this one here. Now I'm going over to here. This last stitch was a purl. So I'm going to flip it over here. My next stitch is going to be a knit. I need to make sure that my yarn is between my two needles. If your yarn gets out of place, you could inadvertently get a yarn over, which will add an extra stitch and a hole, and we don't want to do that. Okay, so I'm pulling from the back needle, bringing to the front. I know that my next stitch needs to be a knit stitch. Yarn in the back of my work, and I'm going to knit that stitch. So I'll continue knitting 1, purling 1 until I've knit until I've worked all of the stitches off of this needle. And then that will complete round 1 of my 1x1 ribbing. At that point, I am going to be sure to mark my knit check. I'm going to have this ready. I need to get it back to 0. There we go. Get that ready. And then also I need my locking stitch marker so I can mark my beginning of the round when I get there. Okay, last one. Now I have successfully knitted one round in the 1x1 ribbing. Kind of show you what that looks like. At this point, a couple of things I want to do. Number one, I want to click my clicker, and I want to mark my beginning of the round with my stitch marker. So I know that this side is, when I hit this side is when I'll click my row counter so that I know I've finished that row around. Go ahead and continue the knit one, purl one ribbing until you have finished round 4. And then I'll show you how to add in the contrasting color to make your first stripe. Okay, on this sample, I have finished 4 rounds of 1x1 ribbing. So now I'm going to add in my contrast color for the stripe. I'm going to pull this back, get ready to knit into here. I just simply make a loop in my contrast color, put my needle in to knit, wrap that around. I like to leave a longer tail for weaving in later. And you don't want to cut your main color. You're going to come back to that. So just leave it hang there and knit that first stitch. And then I'm going to continue on in the ribbing and bring my yarn to the front and purl to the back and knit. And just continue on in this 1x1 rib pattern, knitting 1 stitch, purling 1 stitch all the way around. And we're going to do that 2 times, 2 rounds. Okay, so I'm coming to the end of round 2 using the 1x1 ribbing. So I'm going to knit this and then purl this one. Whoops, actually got to purl it. There we go. Okay, now I'm back to the beginning of my round, and I'm done with that stripe color. Oh, click this, don't want to forget. So I have 2 rounds of the striping done, the first stripe in the cuff of the contrasting color, and I'll show you what that looks like on the finished mitten over here. Here's where I've added that contrast stripe. Now we're just going to go back to ribbing for a couple more rounds, and then we're going to start the increases for the thumb gusset. So here on this sample, you'll see that I have gone ahead and finished the ribbing section. I've done the 4 rounds, then the 2 rounds with the contrasting color, and then 4 more rounds with the main color. Now we're going to get ready to adjust for the thumb area of the mitten, and I'll show you where that is over here. So this is the ribbing section that we just finished. Now we're going to start building up these stitches right here to prepare for the thumb. Okay, the first step that we want to do, we knitted the ribbing in the size 7. We want to go up a needle size for the rest of the mitten. So now we're going to grab our size 8s and switch over to those needles. We are working in, at the same time we're working in the thumb gusset. I've removed the beginning of the round stitch marker because at this point we're going to be making some adjustments for that. And we are going to knit 1 with our main color. From here until we're halfway up the mitten, we're going to continue using the main color. So we knit 1. Now we are going to make 1 right. So to do that, I lift up the stitch, place it on the needle. And what I like to do to give myself a little slack for knitting into this bar, this is a make 1 right. It's a right leaning increase. I am going to knit into this loop that I just placed on my needle, and that increases by 1 stitch. So we make 1, and now I'm going to place a stitch marker right here. So what I've started doing is increasing a stitch here on this side of the stitch marker. These stitches are what we're going to pull off later to help us make the thumb. So just follow along with me. Now we're going to knit all the way across the stitches on this needle. And again, we're at the same time we're transferring over to our larger needle. And the reason why we use a smaller needle to do the cuff is that it cinches it up a little bit, makes it tighter around your wrist. And when you're working in a ribbing, the stretch factor of the ribbing is a little bit more. So by using a smaller needle size, it just kind of makes it all fit. And I'm using the larger needle size and stockinette stitch, which is knit every stitch. Okay, now that side. And it's a little finicky. You know, I've got 2 sets of needles going right now, but that's okay. We'll just flip over. I'll push this one back into the fabric, pull this one in the front. Again, I want to make sure that cord is up against that needle so I don't get a gap there. I continue knitting. And I'm knitting all of the stitches on this needle as well. When I get to the end here, we're going to start the thumb gusset stitches for this side of the mitten. Okay, so I've knit all those. Now it says place marker and make one left. So now we're going to be making a left leaning increase. I'm going to pick up this bar right here in between that gap, and this is fuzzy yarn, so if you can't see it or you don't get it just right, that's okay. We just want to pick up that little bar area and we're just going to knit right into that. Oh, sorry, we're going to knit into the back loop. Let me show you how that's done. So I picked up this bar area right here and we're going to knit through the back loop. And what that does is it twists the base of that stitch, closing up any gaps. There we go. So now I've increased one. Okay, now we are on to 11, round 11. And this one is just a resting round where we knit all the way around. So we knit all those stitches just like we did before. We can now get rid of our size 7. We don't need that anymore. We're on to our 8s. And we're going to knit a resting round. So that's knit all stitches. After we've done that, we'll continue making those increases every other round as you follow the pattern. The same thing. We're going to build up 13 stitches between these 2 stitch markers right here. So what we'll have is 6 on one and 7 on the front. So you'll have 7 on the first needle and 6 on the second needle. Once you have those on there, then I'll show you how we transfer those over to scrap yarn or a locking stitch marker to hold them in place while we continue knitting the rest of our mitten. So on this sample, I am on round 22. I've gone ahead and knit up to the second stitch marker, and I want to show you what it looks like when we have the 13 stitches for the thumb on our needles like this. Now it's time that I am to remove this stitch marker, and I'm going to place these 6 stitches here and 7 stitches over here onto some scrap yarn to hold those for making the thumb later on. I'm going to show you how I do that. And you can use a locking stitch marker to hold these stitches. You can use a stitch holder. I'm going to use some scrap yarn to hold these. So I've got my needle threaded here, and I'm simply going to slide these onto my tapestry needle and slide that onto the yarn. And then we're going to, now at this point I've switched to another round because that was the last stitches of round 22. So I'm going to not forget to click my clicker. Now I know I'm on round 23. 3, but I've got to finish picking up these stitches over here all the way to this stitch marker. There we go. And I've got those all picked up. Now, this is my beginning of the round stitch marker, but I'm using magic loop, and it's highly possible that this is going to slide off. So I want to grab a locking stitch marker and put that on the side of my fabric over here so that I know this is the beginning of my round right here. I will also have the thumb gusset there showing me that that's the beginning of the round, but it's always good to have that little, indicator on there. At this point, I've got, let's see, this set aside. There we go. I'm just going to tie a nice little pretty bow over here. Keep these out of the way. Okay, so this is where I've placed all of these stitches onto the scrap yarn. Now I did take one away from this side, so what we want to do is close this up. That's where the thumb is going to be. And we are beginning round 23 with a make 1. So I'm going to slide this on here. I'm going to make, this is that make 1 increase. So that'll put me back at the right amount of stitches that I need. And then you just continue knitting in the round. Be sure that as you go round by round that you keep track with something. I like this row counter to keep track of my rounds. Because you're making 2 mittens and you want them to match, you can also measure. If you decide that, hey, I have a longer hand, I want my mitten a little bit longer, you can use our sock check and measure this one and then mark that so that you know where to make your second mitten. So you can adjust these a little bit, but just keeping track of your rounds, knitting as you go along. Now you can continue on knitting your mitten until the desired length. In the next episode, we'll finish up these whimsical mittens by working stripes, decreasing for the top, closing up with a grafting method called the Kitchener stitch. Then I'll show you how to pick up and work the thumb stitches. So you'll be ready to wear or gift these fun and fancy mittens. Remember, you can get a kit with the yarn and printed pattern at onebighappy.com. Be sure to hit the subscribe button below and check the bell to be notified every time we have a new video. Happy knitting!